be able to share this virtual poetry reading with you all through McGuffey Art Center. For those of you who don't know, McGuffey is one of the oldest artist-run cooperatives in the country and is located in a historic elementary school building in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia. The Art Center is a community of artists dedicated to practicing art and passing on the creative spirit to the greater Charlottesville community. Before we get started, I'm going to run through some really quick Zoom etiquette for this session. Please be mindful to keep yourself muted for the duration of this event. The mute button is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. This session is being recorded and it will be available for viewing after the talk today. It'll be up on McGuffey's website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you don't want your face to be recorded, you can always turn off your video using the button on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. And also, in case you have to leave partway through, you can always rewatch this on another day. If you have questions or comments that you want to share to engage with Larry, or you just want to engage with other folks who are here today, you can use the chat function to type in your questions. And the chat function is located in the bottom center of the screen. I, along with Corey, who is our other moderator for this afternoon, will be keeping an eye on that chat box and will bring up any questions for Larry. We're so happy to have you all for this virtual poetry reading and then a short discussion with Larry D Giles as part of this recent show at McGuffey Art Center entitled Water, the Agony and Ecstasy of the Black Experience. Curated by the Charlottesville Black Arts Collective, the CBAC, Water, the Agony and Ecstasy of the Black Experience was a multi-medium exhibition featuring the work of 25 Black artists from the state of Virginia. This exhibition took viewers through a journey using water as a metaphor for the Black experience. Artists featured in this exhibition were asked to deliver work exploring the interconnection of water and Black life, based on prose that was written by writer and photographer Corey Price, who also happens to be our moderator for this afternoon. The exhibition was on display on all floors of McGuffey Art Center for the months of February and March. Today, our respected guest and poet, Larry D. Giles, will be reading excerpts from his recently published book, Father Tree Water, Collected Poems and Photographs of the Rappahannock Mind Body Spirit. Mr. Giles will reference page numbers from his book prior to his reading, so if you'd like to follow along with your own personal copy of the book, you can. I'm going to start with introducing our featured guest for the evening, Larry D. Giles. Born in Richmond, Virginia, and raised along the Rappahannock River in Essex County, Larry D. Giles is a retired educator who writes both poetry and creative nonfiction. His first self-published work, Father Tree Water. Through image, poetry, and vignette, his work details the African-American and multicultural experience of coming of age and living in the Essex County and the Richmond area from the 1950s to the present. After Mr. Giles reads, we'll have a short question and answer discussion with photographer Corey Price. Corey Price is a photographer, writer, and engineer based in Charlottesville, Virginia. Originally from Culpeper, Corey has been proud to call Central Virginia home for most of her life and is passionate about telling the stories of her community. She is an arts organizer and is one of the founding members of the Charlottesville Black Arts Collective. Without much further ado, I would like to thank you all for coming, and I would like to thank Mr. Giles for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it over to him to share a little bit about himself and share what he's going to be reading with us today.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
All right, we're going to give Larry a moment to turn on his video.
Good afternoon to everyone, and happy Easter to you. I suppose I should also say happy Ramadan to a few of you. And I brought along my carrot because it's International Carrot Day. I feel I might have a couple of haters out there in the audience who slipped through the door somehow. So I'm happy to speak to all of you. I would like to first extend some gratitude to the three ladies I've worked with as we prepared for this reading. Cherie has been absolutely wonderful. Riel as well. Corey is delightful. And of course, I would like to thank the McGuffey Arts Center and its founding agency for including me in the water exhibit. Again, I thank fellow artists such as Corey Price and many others who dazzle me with their work. I just mentioned to Cherie one of her pieces that I absolutely adore. And thanks to you, many of you, my friends, who have tuned in. It is actually you, many of you, who inspire me. I have to say, choosing pieces for this reading was no easy task because deep in my heart of hearts, I feel that each of us must choose what is important for him or herself. Anyway, the pieces I've chosen are pieces that I feel are generic and cover the entire dynamic of my experience as a human being, especially now when we are involved in such, I call them difficult times. Of course, times have always been difficult with COVID. I hate to say social and political strife. And my doctor in particular, I guess some of yours, who keeps telling us things we really don't want to hear. But all the time, like some of you, like Virgil, who is watching, we have been making, we have been preaching, we have been doing things to make a difference. In fact, 6 years ago, when I was diagnosed with a potentially life-threatening illness, that was the time I was actually most hopeful. That's when I wrote most of the pieces I will read from in a few moments. I guess I was essentially writing for my life, but also something else, to memorialize the lives of the people I love, my ancestors. I call them benefit finders, the people I've emulated all my life, large and small, bitter and sweet. Those are the people I celebrate. I celebrate them because they're still in here. They're inside of me. And I want them to have the honor they deserve. Over the next few minutes, I hope you are reminded of what you already have in here, what you already know up here, that sharing and spirit and creating are one and the same. They all flow in the same river. And as Truman Capote once said, there's never two of anything. And finally, good things do continually happen. And it's those few things which give me, and I hope you, strength. I'm going to, well, as you know, I'm a former educator. So educators live by page numbers. So the first poem I will share with you is on page 59 of Follow Tree Water. And I'd like to think it's one of my more optimistic poems in the book. It's optimistic in that it looks at something that may be non-specific and makes it specifically a part of the heritage one values. wayside. The best get their sugar for free. They find it along the edges of roads and rivers, the round bodies of stones. Dip it from the morning dew. Stir it in petal bowls of flowers, weeping beside logs where they climb. Large bowl muscles glow. Evening, sour and yellow, they sweeten like black molasses, better themselves before the darkest windows. Glisten like spring water. Strive, seek, grow. Wayside, page 59. The next poem is a little bit lighter, page 31, if I can find it. Actually, the next two poems are about women, as I used women to begin my book and my journey into ancestry, because women are like water, restorative, regenerative, elastic, fluid, giving us often a sense of comfort, strength, and eternity. The poem is called Nominee. Nominee is actually a real person from my childhood. She was very close to my mother. This poem is about the joyful uniqueness in the child who is the speaker, also in the mother and in her friend with the unusual name, Nominee. Mama wouldn't tell how she knew her, but the name would roll off her lips like butter or pie, something churned in the old cedar their fathers had dragged up from the woods. "Where you get that hat?" she said. The summer storm suddenly flapping all the way through the cow barn, the old two-story to the graves and sky, so dark and spooky. I sniggered and cackled, nearly falling. And so we all cackled, feeling something so wrong and perfect and pretty that even in the white ropey rain and wind that tried to separate us, we somehow just knew. Nominee. Another poem about a female, Vivian Walker. Vivian Walker's first employ, page 27. This poem has a couple of nuances, little details that an artist puts in to open up the poem and make it more multi-plexual, to create a word. One, you need to know that Vivian Walker is pregnant. Two, she's working at a restaurant during the 50s, the decade in which I was born. But the poem is addressed to her daughter some 30 to 40 years later. And her daughter should be listening in, Elaine. I wish she's there. Vivian Walker's first employ. Speaking of you, casually, she tried to remember what she liked. A table by the window where the white men were quiet, colored only cost a little. a few extra Washingtons, and a beaded pocketbook. Dad's not so angry anymore. We both went out to find what the world was like, and finding it hard as a day without tips. Refused to say, I just can't do it. I'm coming home. Instead, Vivian Walker rattled a few more plates, kneaded her stomach full as cake, sighed, yes, sir, to old man Jake, and stuck 2 quarters down in her brassiere. As you can tell, I love Vivian Walker, and I love Elaine, to whom the poem is addressed. Vivian Walker's first employee. Now we move to a couple of poems about the river. The first poem is Slow Drag River. This is a stone, I guess, that connects the next 3 poems about the river or have some reference to the river in them. You know, I went home when I was working on Father Tree Water to one of the old newspaper offices to get resources and photographs. And I admit I'm very imperfect. I went out, I smoke occasionally. So I went outside to smoke, sat on the park bench and looked under the bench. There was this stone on one of the slats. I picked it up and it said, I love you and I miss you. How's that for deja vu? That made me know I was on the right track when I was writing my book. It also made me think of this poem, which I had already written, Slow Drag River. Some say my mother was a bit shaky to love my father. All those nights he came in, head slobbering, covering it in a cloth. She never wept, but sent us drip drying to the sofa, wondering if he'd go out. Lying by the long, low canvas seat where the sun had suddenly set, I met you, I think, in a kind of ballad, said I do, not seeing how love flows this way and that, falls, slipping suddenly in just a few drops that come from valley and rock, and then seeking only a small pool along the ocean does so much, much more than that. Slow Drag River. Of course, stones sometimes, as alluded to in the last poem, but definitely stated in this one, Dead Street, are heavy. And they are not always resolved or found exactly in the way we wish to find them. Dead Street examines an old pool in an old city where the speaker's heart was broken. Dead Street. That sorry AWOL street where you used to live when I was young and lovely, where all the cars broke, the backyard apple orchards rotted, the swoops hung in long cords, the deep gutted pool closed upon itself and the storekeepers that couldn't sell even their sweet penny candy. I passed you there one night, black, sour, lonely. And without stopping, I drove all the way to Lombardy, still unable to swim out Dead Street. Thank you, Sri. Page 83. Third river poem, dating to the 1600s and being one of the oldest towns in America, currently with a little over 2,000 residents. Rappahannock on the Rappahannock River is the hometown where most of my poems are set. Its famous residents include the subject of this poem, international ragtime star and barber, William Moore. It also includes Richard and Mildred Loving, who frequented my great aunt's juke store, and of course, my cousin, international hip hop star, Chris Brown. In my book, these beautiful souls are symbols of a vast and rich heritage. And to get this poem, you need to know that I connected with William Moore because of the complexion of his skin, like mine. Conceiving My High Yellow for William Moore, March 3rd, 1893 to November 22nd, 1951. Excuse me. Google William Moore on a day with no sound and find him just where he may have left himself, removing a little behind the ears and the hairy neck of my dark uncle, where nub meets blade, bent towards the river. Parts further down, pinned and waiting in panel rooms. Bartered shops where the world has slipped out into a side street, but then suddenly home, like here, in this room with a new HP's light. Keys are somehow brushed into song, blades laid bare upon the cleanest shoulders, where a fairy docks moves with colors that swirl to the river dance, throb to primal chords that shift and swell through the most ancient channels, splay like sweet evening bluffs of laurel and talcum. Conceiving My High Yellow. I like that one. The next poem is a little inventive, page 19. As a writer, I try to do things in divergent ways sometimes, even though a lot of times I remain in my old groaning way. I was accused of being a Shakespearean bard at one point, and that wasn't good by one of my professors. This poem challenges me to test my voice to see if I can sound like a wrecking machine. Let's see if I can do that. The title is East Park Mall. A senior citizen is watching the destruction from his condo of a mall across the street being demolished while he thinks of the time his aunt took him to buy fish there. East Park Mall. Before the condo at Park and Main, running east and west, the yellow Komatsu pushes with a cold and steamy breath. The long arm scoops at clay, slackened slabs, downward tiles of steps, no longer places to go up, not caring to lay the second floor anywhere different than the first. Shove steel into soil, wood into dust, heaps of rubble and brackish rust that chip, crumble, crack, lie broken before the budding trees. Spring, when the earth plans for pears, barters for new perennial seeds, a sleeve short enough for grass and breeze, reaching a blanket buried in the bottom of the dresser. I remember the many things that do not last. And then suddenly, on a whim, my aunt, glossy in a peach hat, springs from her convertible, opens the door, pulls me by one finger to what darts like stars flickering on castles of stone, caves brightened by a neon permanence of all our histories in light. Almost forever we gaze at the sights, the flash, the glow in the clear essence that stays forever in water, bent from the chilly street, now dry with chalk, where I have suddenly traveled back to the mall to grow old. In the condo on the Friday of my last fall, I folded the heap of the large blanket that wouldn't warm, sped to the pet shop on Jefferson, and despite the glares of the little white girl casing her Instagram, I bought myself one of the tiniest little fish. East Park Mall. I like that one for the fact that I was trying to be inventive. Page 66. Let's see if I can find it. Agnes Sappho and Moses Rising. I am Moses. Sappho, as you will remember, is one of our ancient Greek poets. And I'm proud to say my ancestry is more complex than just my Nigerian and coastal African ancestors. I choose to embrace every last single one of my ancestors. I wrote this poem after reading a true story of a poet and her lesbian companion riding along a dark, isolated country road, pretty much like the ones I rode along as a kid. But unlike Agnes, being pulled over she was by an officer she feared may not have thought her life mattered. Agnes, Sappho, and Moses Rising. In that new car, along the dark, winding country road where she knew no one but an old woman in dreads, maybe rough as boards in the headlights of moonlight, and quiet porches where everything moved gently and also stopped. The free verse of poetry forced again below the soft knitted blackness of the leather seat. Beneath that high white star, insisting but giving no direction, knowing both the star and the dark faraway fields where freedom often hangs. I was that passenger. I was that inimitable Black artist writing without interpretation. Like that, Agnes. Agnes is close to my heart. Thank you, Agnes, for that poem. Okay, I'm almost done. Another underdog, I guess, Billy. Billy is the first poem in my book, excuse me, and likely my most favorite poem. And a few people have told me it's my best. Also, it's my oldest poem. It recalls a rich but also poor childhood of large old houses, broken fences, long green slopes along the river, and baseball played with only a few sticks. But the poem also moves to a small present recognition that things often change for the better. Billy. Sunday evenings after church, we played baseball down in the green slope of the field before the big house our grandfathers built with bare hands when they were scrapping teens like us. Billy was my favorite enemy, a long-legged yellow bird who could knuckle a ball over a church tinfoil home plate as though it was a spear. The girls giggled when he grimaced on the mound, ground the ball in his wide palms, and hurled it straight at me. Last night, I stopped at the country store after grandfather's long, sad funeral to buy a Diet Coke and chew grief with old family and neighbors. The store was mostly empty except for Aunt Livonia, the owner, a few faces I didn't recognize, and Billy, back, I guess, in a corner, legs crossed on the secondhand pew, like a would-be Deegan or sullen chief. I asked him about the wife and 5 children who left him, and he shuffled his loosely tied boots, smacked his tobacco, and spat in a small tin can behind the door. Aunt Livonia cursed about the Billy ode, and he talked about the job he was getting on the river. His eyes like wet glass or water, shifting a little like my mother's. Yet in them, I saw an essence around familiarity that sent me home to my bachelor apartment in the city, feeling both ashamed and proud I had all those Sundays let him strike me out. Billy. The last poem is probably my second most favorite. Excuse me. I guess it explores the implausibility but majesty of the human experience in the presence of not another human being like Billy, but for the sake of inclusion and openness to all that life gives us, an animal. Like the stone I showed you, like the carrot I brought for you, like Father Tree Water, like you and me. Truth can be found in the most surprising places. A theory of evolution. I don't know why his feet are curled, mine pointing, half-assed in thatched sandals beside an anthill on the other side of China. But in a silly, offhand way, we both have 4, quite possibly 5. The last, a fancy one, all right to be flat in grass. I lost 1,000,000 years ago, dodging a scaly dinosaur reaching between 2 biblical stones. Yesterday, life stunk like old fish. I cried over cancer and worked too hard in the lilies, while he, suddenly in love, chased a beautiful monarch to its death. But as though only now, there is a still sweetness in the air, cuffed beneath my chair, happy to be worn down and floppy in the day's end dust. I, too quieted by the implausibility of love stopping exactly at my toe, to live forever in this yard like no other, forgetting the gnats and flies, all too old and reverent now to worry why all things thirst and burn and feast. With 100,000 rays, the sun goes down, sometimes without a word of sight. Fluted lights, we both watch, a bit surprised and complacent to almost stop, caught like pinwheels and dandelions under the rocks and stars, that though riding, shining through our soft yellow pilot scarfs and rounded ears, are the last slow drift of 1,000 evenings, still not over. Now they are too close for ending. Here in the middle of all of where a petal, an airborne pappus, most peacefully through some great design, some ascension, some native will has decided it is to be forever quiet, forever pleased with its extraordinary feline journey. God's love to you, and be kind to others. I love each of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful reading on a lovely Sunday. And so many folks are smiling, they're clapping after every poem, just in awe of your work in this book. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I adore you as well. I think you implied you like my work.
Yes, there's a couple people saying thank you so much in the chat and in all of you. So just some beautiful words for you.
Thank you so much.
We are going to get into the Q&A portion of this. So if you've got questions, or if you've got—
Oh my God, I hate answering questions, Corey.
It'll be a conversation. We're getting into the conversation portion.
No former teachers don't answer any questions.
But anywho, so we'll get right into it. So I wanted to start with the title of your book, Father Tree Water. And I'd like to ask, what draws you to water and what's your connection to it?
I think what draws me to water is many things, but what comes to mind right now is the fact that water was a source of beauty in my youth, in my childhood, because that was around I was born in 53. So between the early 50s and the 60s, my grandparents with whom I grew up, they didn't have, for a time, they didn't have a well. Not to mention running water, they didn't have a well. So we climbed across the field and went all the way back down there, carrying buckets to get water. But it wasn't a chore. We enjoyed it. We looked at the ladies' slippers along the way. We watched how the slope came down suddenly and the leaves let us slide. There was joy in whatever we did, for the most part. And that joy was connected to nature, but it was also connected to my grandfather's attitude, because he was very grounded in the Baptist faith, and he kind of carried that in his presence, and we felt it. So water has been a part of my life and still is. And of course, we graduated to a well and finally to running water. Finally to this and this carrot. We've made a full circle.
Yes, indeed. The water to make it into your home and also into that.
I hope I answered your question. I don't really believe questions can be fully answered because they can go in so many different directions. So I chose the spring because the spring is a source of beauty for me, and it's a deep part of my heritage.
So in thinking about heritage, you spoke of your grandfather's presence. You know, there's a spiritual element with your work, or even like an essence with your work. And I think you're kind of paralleling or making that akin to water. So why is this important for you to acknowledge in your poetry?
That's a good question. A great question. It's important for me to acknowledge that I am valuable as a human being, and not necessarily for my accomplishments or my deeds, but because I am here and I, like you, experience the joy, the agony, the heartbreaks, all that you experience, I experience. I'm here, I'm a part of it, I'm connected to you. There's a great spirit and power in knowing that you are part of something that's larger than yourself. So pretty much that's where I am with that.
Yeah.
Spirit is a part of who I am, actually. Accepting that everything connects and that nature or some power other than myself, I'm a part of it, it's gonna make it all work in the long run. That's the spirit I wanted to infuse into my book. And actually, it happened. I feel in my heart it happened.
I think we can feel that as well, as you were reading. And there was so much, to me, it seems like you were recalling memories as you were reading, from just the way that your posture changed. You started chuckling as you remembered things, or as you were reading through the poems. And I think in order to be able to communicate that through the way that you read poetry is just this really beautiful, almost mechanism that comes from a poetry reading and hearing the poet speak about their work. And
it's a circle. It's a circle. One gives from here, from what one knows, and you interact with that, and you're giving back. Your questions tell me that you were invoked and involved, and so it's a circle. It's a giving circle.
Yes.
And it's good.
And yes, it's very good. It's grounding, and it is connection. It's everything is connection.
It's affirming.
It's affirming. It's affirming. And I think when you read or you hear poetry, that gives you that evokes that connection and makes you feel that you are affirmed, you belong, you are supposed to be in this place. It requires this level of vulnerability from the poet. So I wanted to ask, is there something in your creative process or even in your character that allows you to express those deep emotions while also writing so confidently about them?
Well, a lot of my character does, I hate to keep speaking of the same people, comes from my grandfather, but it not only comes from him. I grew up in a small agrarian community, mostly African American, where there were so many different personalities, and you would kind of get a little bit from this one, get a little bit from that one, and oh my God, here's something else coming here. You had so many rich, powerful influences coming from different places. And so you would just fill with something very special. That gave me a sense of empowerment from an early age, even though I was disadvantaged and challenged in other ways. I got some beautiful gifts that came at the same time. I don't feel that anything in life is like all black or all white. It's a mixture of different components. And we are in the driver's seat to turn them as we wish to turn them. I choose to turn them into something bright. And so it also means that I'm vulnerable because I have to tell about some of the darkness. I have to tell about being hurt. Being hurt has little value unless you know you had that grandfather who would let nothing stop him. So I think I did answer that for now. There's much more to say, obviously.
So Shri, would you mind sharing the two paintings? And while she pulls that up, I'm out of curiosity, how did you get into writing in the first place? What inspired you to write your first poem?
What inspired me to write my first poem was probably a desire for placement and identity in a family where I had some very strong role models who were already reading wonderful things, speaking eloquently, some not speaking so eloquently, some not doing such wonderful things. But I gravitated toward the light. I gravitated toward the aunt who wanted to go to school and to college. So that influenced me. And I've kind of lost my train of thought. You wanted me to go and get my paintings?
Well, Tree's got a slide.
I hope not. They're in storage.
But I also wanted to speak to, because you're a multi-talented artist.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, speak to the two paintings that you had in our show at McGuffey. And they are both of the same title, right? Essex County Home Place. And they're in two different years, in 1953 and in 1963. So, I'm curious if you could share any stories behind these farmhouses, and also why you chose to paint them in two different years.
Okay. The first one, the one on the left, I most recently worked on. It's a twilight scene. It's set in the year of my birth. So the twilight is kind of a metaphor for life and for beginning. And that's pretty much, and for beauty, because for many things actually, because when I was a kid, twilight was a time of getting ready, was a time of peace, a time of quiet, a time of readiness, a time of spirituality, a time of closeness with nature. Nature is a very important component of my background. So I was trying to get some of that warmth into the painting, and I'm still working on it, of course. That's still in process. The second one is also a metaphor of a bright, happy childhood that I had in some ways not so much. But like I said, oftentimes we have to spend a lot more time on making beauty than we have remembering the negative. So with this painting, I was funneling most of my joy for my life into the brightness of that spring morning after it had rained and washed the clothes clean and the yard and all the flowers. I made everything bloom, even things that weren't supposed to bloom. I made them bloom in that painting. I wanted that painting to be perfection. So what I'm getting at is a broader issue that sometimes we think we aren't on course, but in many ways, we've already lived something that's perfect and whole. And that's inside of us. And that's where our strength comes from as we deal with aging, disease, and all of life's challenges. And life will continue to challenge us.
Indeed, it will.
And the date on that one was a few years later. That was in the 60s. I was also trying to set this metaphor out there about, it was a time of the civil rights movement, but my family was not so much affected by the civil rights issue because we kind of, we lived in our own little place of perfection. We weren't bothered by race or any of those issues. We were fairly happy in our own little microcosm. Mm-hmm. And so I was getting at that issue as well. So all people in America haven't directly been affected by racism the way some people try to say. If it is, it's like it's peripheral, but it's not right here in our core. Our core is a place of beauty.
And I like that you said that we have, trying to remember how you said it. It was just the right way to say it. I'm trying to remember, but we have experienced completion. We have experienced wholeness already with our life, and we're going to continue to grow and continue to change. But to have that strength pull from that center of something where we have, we are beautiful, we have experienced wonderful things, to have that centered at your core so that that will carry you with your life is, I think, a beautiful way or a beautiful thought to end our poetry reading and conversation here today. But what I did want to say is there are some really wonderful things in the chat. And if anybody else has any thoughts you'd like to share while we're still here, I'm just going to read a few of them because I think they're just lovely.
Will you tell us approximately when someone could view the recording?
Of course, yes. I think Shri will mention that as she wraps up. But I wanted to just let you know that, well, Tina Pride said, thank you, really enjoyed it. Monica Wright said this was amazing. John, thanks, Larry, glad I could join. Virgil, Larry is my brilliant classmate who taught me much as a college roommate. And then Shri shared your link to your book on Barnes and Noble as well for anyone else who wants to purchase it. Jontina, it says, love your red background in the first painting. So there's a lot of love here on this call and in the chat for you. And if anybody has final thoughts or anything they're curious about or questions, go ahead and type those in.
Laura, your spirit is amazing. I just love listening to you. So keep doing what you're doing. If I can't do it, I would like you to do it. You have the most wonderful spirit. And the three of you I work with during this process have been absolutely amazing. I really appreciate that. Because finding good people to interact with is a challenge at times. And I did have a very positive experience as we worked on this project. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you from ours. Shri and Brielle are both clapping. And you keep it up too. I want to read the next book. I can't wait to see what the second one will be.
Thank you.
So thank you. This was a beautiful way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I think so too. It was good for me. I know that for sure.
Good. Well, Pam Carter, I love you and your work, Mr. Giles.
Thank you.
And Jackie Jones says, hello, I made it. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work, your words. It was our honor and our pleasure to have you today. So with that, I'm going to take back to Shri.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out today. This has been such a wonderful, honestly, like Corey said, such a wonderful way to spend Easter Sunday and this afternoon, and on a very good weather day here in Charlottesville too. And I just want to thank Mr. Giles for joining us and working with us on this project. I know when we first approached you about it, it was definitely something that I was like, when is it going to happen? We don't know. And I'm just so glad that it came together and that we were able to have you here and that we were able to do something even during COVID. As much as we would have loved to have you perform in person, this was the next best thing to at least be able to hear you.
Thank you so much.
And I think before we close out, I just want to thank everyone for coming and let them know that within the next 4 or 5 days, so probably mid next week, this recording will be up on our website. And we'll actually send out the recording link to everybody that's registered for this talk.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And there's a couple of people who weren't able to make it out. So I'm sure they'd appreciate the recording to be able to watch it. And feel free to share that link with your friends. It'll be on YouTube. And I'm sure, Larry, you can send it to all the people you know.
You girls made a difference in my life. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to. But before we close out, there's one quick thing, a virtual event that we're doing at McGuffey Art Center that I just want to share. We've got a another virtual artist talk that we're doing on April 8th at 5:30 p.m. And it's with a local artist named Natalie Cox, who is a young residency artist that was at McGuffey Art Center during the months of February and March. She's a painter who creates these abstract, non-representational landscapes that kind of pull the viewer into worlds that she makes. And you can register the same way you did for Larry's talk on our main website, mcguffeyartcenter.com. And without much further ado, I think I'm going to let everybody go for the afternoon and enjoy the beautiful weather day. And thank you so much, Larry, for being here.
You're welcome. God's love to you.
Piping up just to thank you as well, Larry. It was really nice to meet you.
You too, Brielle. Bye.
Thank you all for coming out. See you, everyone.